Welcome to today's topic. We are going to be talking about intermittent fasting, which is very trendy, very popular. There is also a lot of research being done about intermittent fasting. So I'm not here to discount intermittent fasting and all of the potential benefits that it involves. What I really want to talk about today is, does intermittent fasting actually help weight loss in a well-researched way that we have enough data to actually implement that as a technique in our fat loss goals? And is it actually something that's necessary? A lot of times what we want to think about when we hear new fads or new ideas about the body is this even necessary to actually get results? There's a concept in medicine which is the minimum dose effective. So when I worked as a nurse, this was something we talked about a lot because all medicines or all drugs have negative consequences to the body as well, right? So we're always thinking about what's the minimum dose that I can give to produce a therapeutic effect without causing the toxic side effects of administering this medicine. And I like to use that concept of minimum dose effective to also think about our nutrition strategies when we are working on fat loss or weight loss goals. So, obesity is an epidemic in our country. Obesity increases your risk of heart disease. It increases your risk of diabetes type 2. It increases joint issues. And I have seen these firsthand as a nurse, and I've also seen them firsthand in the clients who come to me. So it's really important that we kind of look at all of the evidence and all of the strategies so that as we're designing protocols to really try to help people, we are looking at all the evidence. So that's what we're going to do today. Now, the first thing to really think about whenever you hear a new fad or trend when it comes to nutrition is you want to think about, is this being positioned as a rigid rule? Is this being positioned as a rigid rule? Your red flag alert should go up anytime you hear a rigid rule. Just remember RR, rigid rule equals red flag. Rigid rules when it comes to eating usually are indicative of not something that is evidence-based, not something that is actually bolstered by research. And we're going to look at the research and actually go through that. So if you hear someone say, only eat between 11 a.m. and 7 p.m., or get all your calories in from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., that's a rigid rule that we want to question instead of just taking at a blink kind of acceptance. So let's dive in. So the first thing is I want to define some terms. What a lot of people call intermittent fasting is actually time-restricted feeding. They're misusing the terms. So you could be following a influencer. You could be following a nutritionist online. You could be reading an article on, some site, and they're saying, is intermittent fasting, blah, 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 or you should intermittent fast, or 3 reasons you should do intermittent fasting. And they're actually not talking about intermittent fasting. They're talking about time-restricted feeding. So let's define these two terms. Intermittent fasting is where you technically don't eat for 24 to 72 hours, or you drastically reduce your calories to say less than 60% for 2 to 3 days a week or alternate days. So true fasting is no eating, and no eating for a discrete period of time like 24 to 72 hours. Time-restricted feeding is where you don't eat certain hours of the day. So you only eat from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., or you only eat from 12 p.m. to 8 p.m., or you only eat from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Okay, so does that make sense? Those are two different terms. Now, the headline for this video is about intermittent fasting because that's what people think about when we talk about this topic. They don't even know what time-restricted feeding means. So I'm using that term to talk about this whole bucket of concepts, but I want you to understand that there is a difference between intermittent fasting and there is a difference between time-restricted feeding, okay? Makes sense? Now, the next thing is that the research, so look, there's mixed research on time-restricted feeding and intermittent fasting as a protocol for weight loss. So there was a 2019 study done in Nutrients Journal, and it reviewed 9 out of 11 studies. And it reviewed 9 out of 11 studies, and it found no difference between intermittent calorie restriction and continuous energy restriction when it comes to causing weight loss. Okay, so what does this mean? So intermittent energy restriction is also known as what we just talked about, time restricted feeding, or how you think about it in your brain as intermittent fasting, all right? Continuous energy restriction is where we decrease someone's energy for, normal like energy like restriction. There's like, you're only going to eat this much in 24 hours, but you can eat at any time of the day. It doesn't matter what time you eat it. All right. So those are the 2 studies that it compared. It compared 9 out of 11 studies. So it was actually like a meta-analysis. It wasn't just one study. Found in 9 out of 11 of those studies, there was no difference between intermittent energy restriction and continuous energy restriction in causing weight loss. Okay. This is pretty strong evidence. So what this means is what probably is causing the weight loss in people who are doing time restricted feeding is they're just eating less calories. Okay. So if you're just eating less calories because you can only eat 7 hours of the day, that's the same thing as just limiting your calories overall throughout the whole day. Does this make sense? And this is a key principle behind weight loss. Remember that it's very trendy now to talk about how calories aren't that important anymore. I don't know where this is coming. It's kind of like saying you don't really need gasoline for your car. You could just put oil in your car and it will run and get you places. This makes no sense. So calories definitely do matter. Other synergistic components to weight loss, for sure. But is the fundamental core issue intake and output? Yes. All right. So that's the first reason why we need to question intermittent fasting as this holy grail of fat loss. Actually, a lot of the studies show that, sure, it causes weight loss, but it causes weight loss because it's restricting calories, not because of the timing. All right. Which is what we can do with any normal continuous energy restriction. Okay. The second reason that we really need to question, do we even need to do this, is guess what? You already do time restricted feeding. You do it every night. It's called sleeping. Last night I had dinner at right at 7 p.m. I finished eating. I went to an event with friends, finished eating. I slept, I woke up, I journaled, I drank some tea. I didn't eat breakfast till 8:30. I did a 13 and a half hour fast. That's why it's called breakfast. Break the fast. We're already doing it. Isn't that amazing? It's like it's part of our design. It's like it's built into our bodies to already do time restricted feeding. But now we have a bunch of influencers and people telling us that we should be doing this. And now we're doing all these studies to research, does time restricted feeding help us lose weight? Well, you're already doing time restricted feeding. You've been doing it since the dawn of time, okay? So you really don't need to obsess about doing time restricted feeding anyway, because you're already doing it. Now, also, when I'm talking about fat loss, I'm not just talking about fat loss. I'm talking about sustainable fat loss. My clients come to me because they've tried quick fixes. They can lose 5 pounds on their own in 2 weeks. That's not an issue. They can lose 10 pounds on their own. That's not an issue. It's keeping it off. It's sustaining it, because the world is full of food temptations. The world is full of amazing things to eat at every corner, and we are struggling with maintaining our weight in our lifestyle in this obesogenic environment that we live in. So I'm sorry, but if someone's you can only eat from 8 to 3 p.m., how does that now affect my social life? I went to a group at my church last night, and there was fellowship and there was food. I want to participate. I want to break bread with the people in my community. I want to have a brownie. I want to enjoy myself and the experience of being with these people. I don't want to be oh, I do time restricted feeding, so I stopped eating at 3, so I can't eat now. That is a rigid rule, which is the opposite of sustainable nutrition. So that's another reason that intermittent fasting just isn't sustainable, and it's not necessary. So we've already established that the research shows there's no real difference between intermittent energy restriction and continuous energy restriction, and we already know now that it's not sustainable for our social lives, okay? And we already know that we already do it naturally when we're sleeping, right? It's also a very masculine approach to nutrition. So another thing that really gets my panties in a wad, who says that, okay? I'm just like, I'm on one today, y'all, okay? So another thing that really gets me going is a lot of these studies are done by men, they're done on men, and then the people preaching about the results, I biohack my way, I'm a biohacker, I'm gonna be a cyborg and never die. I'm a podcaster who biohacks my way. I'm so sick of the biohacking podcaster man thing. And it's like, that actually is great for you as a man, but that is actually not what's necessarily best for women's bodies. Think about this from a biological evolutionary perspective. Well, women had to feed the babies from the boobies, okay? So women are in charge of feeding the children. And if women are having intermittent intake constantly, they don't have a steady stream of nutrients for the baby. They don't have a steady stream of milk supply. A lot of women know this. Even in modern times, milk supply is challenging. You don't have enough milk supply, your babies die. Okay, back in the olden days when there's no formula, your baby can't eat some, fresh antelope that you've just shot. It can just drink your breast milk. And so it really makes no sense biologically that a woman's body would thrive off of starving itself until noon every day, okay? That just doesn't make sense. And the evidence bears that out. There's very few women that I work with who feel better not eating breakfast. Now, if somebody does feel better not eating right away, can they wait to eat? Yes, because we also don't need to be obsessed about timing. And my clients learn this too. Timing is relatively unimportant when it comes to sustainable fat loss. It's less about what time you're eating, y'all. It's how much you're eating and the quality of what you're eating and how you're spiking your insulin. All right. Okay. So let's say, for example, that you were doing time restricted feeding. So you're in this rigid rule. You can only eat from 8 to 3, and you've just done a super heavy workout at 4:30 p.m. Now you're not going to eat again until 11 a.m. the next morning? What? This makes no sense. But if you've stuck yourself into some rigid protocol, I do time restricted feeding. So now what? You don't work out in the evening. You don't go for walks with your friends. I play sand volleyball in the summer in Austin, and I'm hungry after I play sand volleyball for an hour. I need some food, even if it's 9:30 p.m. So, this is why I created Empower. This is why I don't believe in rigid rules. I believe in systems, frameworks, understanding methodology behind nutrition, giving you lots of tools and the ability to flex things flexibly within frameworks and get away from these rigid, restrictive, very repressive rules. All right. It's just not sustainable. What if you have a networking dinner with clients? What if you want to take a client out for a celebratory dinner? What if you have date night with your boo? What if your fiance wants to take you out for, appetizers after work? What if you want to meet friends for dinner, or you want to fellowship with people at your church? Now you are stuck in this very restrictive fad diet rule. And it just perpetuates women neglecting themselves, really. Right? So, okay, so we're telling women now, now don't eat. It's all the same message. It's either just don't eat enough, and then it's now just don't eat at certain times, right? It's so repressive to women, and it just perpetuates that stereotype and kind of negative practice of women neglecting themselves and not prioritizing themselves. And I am not here for that, and I will not get behind that. I want to just end with a quick story about a client of mine, actually, and she just is going to be on the podcast as well. So her story was she actually was trying to do intermittent fasting or time restricted feeding, and she was gaining weight. So really the straw that broke the camel's back, and the reason she came to me, is because she was trying to do all the things that she had always done before to lose weight, and it wasn't working. And then she was actually doing time restricted feeding, and she started gaining weight. She was like, what is going on? literally came to me as a client, started working with me, lost 3 pounds in a week. And here's what's interesting about that. A lot of people, when they talk about quick weight loss, I lost 2 or 3 pounds the first week. A lot of that typically is water weight, because people are losing glycogen stores, and carbohydrate stores, which are stored with water grams. What's interesting about this client, though, is she was under eating carbohydrates before she came to me. So she was actually eating more carbohydrates when she came to me. So the weight loss can't have just been can't have been from just water, because her carbs actually increase. It was very interesting. So, and then she ended up losing like 10 pounds with me, super easy, despite also like having alcohol during her summer, social events and everything, because she just had like a lot of social things. You know, she works in sales. She also is engaged. So just like a lot of events for her that summer. And she still did fantastic. So you can just take time restricted feeding, put it in the garbage bin. And people who do time restricted feeding can become so grumpy. Who wants to be around a grumpster? Not me. No, thank you. I once worked with a girl in LA. I shared an office with her, who did the master cleanse for 10 days. She turned into a raging bish. All right. She was not fun to be around. You guys, this is why these restrictive things are not good for women. It not only impacts your fat loss goals, it impacts your energy, it impacts your vitality, it impacts your mood, it impacts your mental health, and all of those things also impact your ability to have positive relationships, generate wealth in your life, serve your clients well, perform at work, right? Like, you need to be on and up and awesome as a human to serve people in the world. And if you're starving yourself, whether it's starving yourself because you're just not eating enough overall, or starving yourself because you're only allowing yourself to eat during certain times of the day, just say no. Now, I do want to say there is some good research about both intermittent fasting and time restricted feeding when it comes to people with severe metabolic dysregulation, people who have something called metabolic syndrome, which none of you have. Even if you have diabetes type 2, you do not necessarily have metabolic syndrome. Not that diabetes type 2 is not also a serious condition, but there is some research that indicates people who have metabolic syndrome, it can improve some of their cardiac markers, their dyslipidemia, right, which is the amount of cholesterol and lipids you have circulating in your bloodstream. It can improve some of those markers even without weight loss, which is interesting and relevant research that could potentially help people with metabolic issues, morbid obesity, things like that. So I'm not discounting that there is some good research out there. I'm saying, one, let's actually look at, first, let's define the terms correctly. Okay, are we intermittent fasting or are we time restricted feeding? Second, let's actually look at what the research says. Is there conclusive evidence and research that says that time restricted feeding is vastly better and more effective than just normal continuous energy restriction? No, there's not. They're the same, basically. Is it sustainable? Does it work for our lifestyle as women who are social, who are interacting with clients, who are having fun, who are going out, who are dating, who are with our friend group? Does it work in that way? Is it sustainable? And could it actually sabotage our results? Like the client I told you about that story anecdotally, she actually was gaining weight doing time restricted feeding, which could be because it was disturbing her hormonal balance as a woman and further worsening some pre-existing hormonal conditions that she actually had. All right. So there is some evidence that potentially it can help with some of these. Here's what's interesting. The time restricted feeding, the reason they think that it might potentially help some of these cardiac markers for things like metabolic syndrome is because it seems to help regulate the circadian rhythm. All right. So we have like chronobiology. We have we don't have clocks inside of us, but we have certain genes and things that help regulate our like inner clock. And there's like certain genes that are called clock genes. And there is evidence that shows like circadian rhythm dysfunction can cause a lot of problems. Circadian rhythm dysfunction can actually contribute to bipolar disorder. Circadian rhythm dysfunction can contribute to weight gain or metabolic syndromes as well. So potentially what the time restricted feeding is doing is somehow kind of resetting the circadian rhythm. There's also some research I read that said just eating at regular times of the day can do the same thing as time-restricted feeding in just like creating that regularity to the circadian rhythm. All right. But there are also lots of other things that can improve your circadian rhythm besides starving yourself out for the day. 1, you can get bright sunlight first thing in the morning. 2, you can avoid coffee. 3, you can turn off all the lights in your house at 6 or 7 p.m. I know it sounds kind of weird, but I've been doing this like living pioneer style, and it's kind of amazing for your sleep. And just lighting some candles, all right? And lighting some candles and just having that natural glow, that can help your circadian rhythm. Taking a hot bath in the evening before bed can help your circadian rhythm because of the way that it spikes body temp and then body temp lowers. So look, there are potential benefits to time-restricted feeding for things like metabolic syndrome, some potential cardioprotective effects, but for fat loss, it's unnecessary. You don't need to do it. You don't need to hop on the bandwagon. What you actually need to do is learn the correct quantity to eat for your body and your goals throughout your life. You need to learn your unique macronutrient formula. You need to learn your unique insulin sensitivity. How does your body respond to carbohydrates? Are you super high insulin sensitivity? Are you super low? Are you somewhere in the middle? That's what's important, not timing, okay? And here's the thing too, if you feel better like waiting 14 hours between your dinner and your breakfast, go for it. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm not saying you can't do restricted feeding. I'm just saying that it's not necessary. It's not essential. It's not something that you now need to hop on the bandwagon, the latest fad, and do. It's just not actually essential. Is time-restricted feeding good for your gut? I will actually look and see if there's any evidence or research about that. We have to be careful with the gut health kind of thing too, because that's become very trendy too. And we have to make sure that we are not ascribing correlation to cause. So this is a big issue with research where people, they think because two things are correlated, there's a causal relation between the two. Causal relations are the hardest thing to prove conclusively in research, the hardest thing. So for example, you might do a study on depression and discover that people who are depressed are low in vitamin D. And so you might conclude that the low vitamin D is causing the depression. Now, I'm not saying they're not related. I'm just using this as an example. That could be an incorrect causal relationship that you've drawn from that research. They could be correlated, but one doesn't cause the other. And this is where a lot of misinformation, pseudoscience, BS science that you see and recommendations come from, okay? So I hope this dispels any questions you have about intermittent fasting and time-restricted feeding. I hope it clarified the difference between the two for you. I hope that you understand that the most important factor is still how much you are eating consistently over time and how you are moving your body, the quality of the carbohydrates you're eating, and how your body is responding to those as well. I super enjoyed sharing this topic with you today. As always, if you have questions about today's topic, you can send me a message on Facebook at Heather McConaughey or Instagram at Heather McConaughey, and I'm happy to chat more with you about your goals. You can also click the link in my Instagram bio, learn more to get weekly education from me on sustainable nutrition that will help you lose fat without fad diets or forbidden foods. If this helped you to share it with somebody who you think it would make a difference for. Share it to your Instagram stories, tag me. I would love to see that. And I'm always here to answer questions. Thanks so much.